Hi, I'm David Gans. Deadhead TV was a wonderful example of community journalism created and staffed by skilled and passionate fellow Deadheads. When Deadhead TV arrived in the late 1980s, I was a working music journalist and the host of the Deadhead Hour, so I was thrilled when they invited me to contribute from time to time. One of my favorite collaborations with DTV was an interview with Candace Brightman, the Grateful Dead's lighting director from 1972 through 1995. She was very generous with her time. She told us how she came to work for the Dead, and she shared some delightful stories. We learned a lot about how light and sound interact in the creative wonderland of a Grateful Dead show. I'm so glad these wonderful Deadhead TV programs were recently pulled out of the archive and are now available, and I'm delighted to see the uncut version of my interview with Candace. Here is part 1 of 2.
Well, how did you first hook up with the Grateful Dead?
I was doing lights for another band. It was John McLaughlin, Intermounting Flame. Remember that era when he had just made that album? And I had gone to a great deal of trouble to I wanted to see this show, and I couldn't. There was no way I could fit it into my schedule any of the times that it was being done in my area. And I kept being out of town, or I was busy working on another show or something. So I called up the promoter for a show of his in New York and got a job doing lighting for it, which is the only way I could do it, as it turned out.
You were already doing lights and stuff?
Oh yeah, and yeah, I had worked at the Fillmore East and that Capitol Theater in Port Chester. I don't know, are you familiar with that theater?
I never went, but I've sure heard some great tapes from
it. Yeah. It was a good place. It was where people went in lots of cases, like Mad Dogs and Englishmen and Traffic and the Allman Brothers and I don't remember, a lot of other bands, to get ready for New York. So they would go and do like 6 days there instead of just a weekend. So
like opening a play in New Haven or something.
Yeah, it was very nice. The Dead also did that. They would do long stints there. It seems to me that I guess they did that at the Fillmores at the same time. First there was the Fillmore, and I worked there, and then the Capitol opened up. I was at the Capitol Theater. I was working there for a couple of years as a lighting designer, and I would also do shows, individual shows like Madison Square Garden or Cobo Hall in Detroit, or there wasn't an Omni. I forget what preceded the Omni in Atlanta. But anyway, when bands were doing, not the Fox, there was another place. I think it's called the Auditorium Theater or something like that. And also the Auditorium Theater in Chicago for shows for other bands, any bands that had like a big show somewhere on the East Coast or pretty much east of the Mississippi. They would often ask me to do the lights for it. And then they would do the small towns and I would just do the big shows. So I was kind of doing the Capitol Theater and then doing Howard Stein's series of shows that he did at Madison Square Garden. With like Jethro Tull and 10 Years After and a lot of screwball people, Tony Orlando and Dawn. Everybody. And I was running around the country doing all these shows, you know, and so I wanted to see John McLaughlin, and I couldn't work this out. So anyway, I worked it out so that I could go up to Buffalo and actually do the lights for this thing, which sort of paid my way to get up there, although I think I would have gone even if I hadn't got the job of lighting it. And the opening act for that was Jerry Garcia and Howard Wales. Remember them?
Wow.
Remember them? Have you seen them?
Never saw them live, but sure did make some great recordings.
Yes, they were really wonderful. They were great. So so Jerry was at that show and was out in the audience for the I guess, sat out front and watched John McLaughlin. And he liked that. He liked the way it looked and asked me if I would do lights for their European tour. And I said I would think about it. I wasn't actually just totally bowled over for some reason.
Had you seen the Grateful Dead?
Yes, and I love them.
Uh-huh.
There's something about Jerry, though, and about everyone in the Grateful Dead organization that they're such con artists, and I don't really mind this, it's going on TV. I think it's part of their charm, and it's a quality about them that I love. I don't dislike it at all, but every time they put something to you, you always kind of want to say, wait a minute, what's the deal here? And they really are that way. I mean, they'll get a lot of mileage out of it, especially in the old days. I don't know, like some of the things that Boots used to do. Well, there's, in the Grateful Dead movie, there's a routine with Jerry talking to Boots, remember, who throws that great flash paper. I wish somebody, well, no, I shouldn't get that started, but you can see him in that little bit in the Grateful Dead movie.
Try to get him up at the top. Think about it. Because that would be the hippest. That would be the hippest. Then you'd have
The screen is so high,
Hey, man, I know, but you'll just have to get stuff to happen down here in the middle somewhere by timing it.
Suggesting that Boots do something, I don't remember what it is, but that's kind of not safe.
He was telling him how to get the thing higher up into like...
In the scap?
He had him like climbing up something or something.
Right.
Because Jerry, I remember the first time I ever saw the Dead, Boots had that flame coming up right on the beat.
It's great.
It was such a knockout.
It's great, but Jerry's like saying, well, can't you do something which was like
Taking him
physically
up.
probably not safe? And if he did go up there, Parrish would probably, run up and throw him off the scaffolding or something. And Jerry knows this, but Jerry's always, let's do it, whatever it is. People are always coming away from conversation with Garcia saying, wow, he really loved my idea. He really wants to do it, whatever it is. He always says yes. He never says no, unless it's really ghastly, I guess. But so they'll, anyway, my initial reaction was that I would think about it. Just my first response is, now, wait a minute, what's really going on here? Do I really want to do this? But mainly just because of the way he has a...
Do you suppose if... I wonder how much he was concerned with how quickly you said yes. Like if you had jumped in and said yes immediately, would it have been?
No.
So.
No, I think he just decided that here was someone that they had worked with a lot at the Capitol, and I think I'd done some shows. Yeah, I'd gone to Chicago and done some shows there in Atlanta and stuff. Done those sort of the special show circuit. Either working for them or for Howard Stein, I don't remember which. And so he knew that they were sort of in safe hands with me, and I did a nice job, did a real good job, I think. So I guess he sat out there and thought, oh, we're doing a European tour, we don't want we want to have some sort of consistency and know that that things are going to look good, and so this would be a person to do it. It wasn't like I think it was a very practical decision.
Could have been an inspired decision, too.
It could have. Maybe he just, who knows? I have no idea. But he seems to me to be a fairly practical
He seems like,
guy.
he also seems like his instincts are good.
Yeah.
So it's probably a combination
Yeah,
of the two.
I was honored and very pleased and very excited, but I didn't jump right into it. I did ask him what it paid, and he seemed genuinely surprised at that I would, within the same initial conversation, ask him what he was offering. And he said, I don't remember the exact words, but he said, well, some people just work for us, I don't know for what, but for nothing. They're just part of the family. And I thought, I want to be, I like my life, and I love the Grateful Dead, but, I just said, right, no, well, forget that. I really was going to want to be paid. There's another example of, have you ever run into this sort of, I don't know. This has changed, you know, but he did say that, and I thought it was really pretty funny.
But you agreed to do it.
Yeah.
And was it fun? Did you have a good time?
Oh, I had a wonderful
European
time.
tour?
Oh, I had a wonderful time. Yeah, it was really. I had a lot of misgivings. It was there. I had never done a tour before, and there were no touring systems, and so I had to make a system, and then I had to make sure that I had the parts that could only be used in Europe. Because there's the 170 volts at the time. I think anyway, the voltages were different, and you had to have a different kind of dimmers, and we had to have different kinds of, and we also had to use chokes on our SCR dimmers so that we wouldn't hear the lights in the sound system, which was a problem everywhere in the United States. They just didn't have that kind of dimmer then. So it was like a major number, and there wasn't a we. When I say we, but it was me. So
you were essentially serving as the contractor as well as the
yeah,
lighting
right.
operator.
And then I did what I always did in those situations. When there was just something I didn't know how to do, I called up the people I knew who did know how to do it and asked them what the deal was, and got as much help from everybody as I could. And went and talked to Chip Monk. I don't know if you know who he is, but he at the time was the Stones lighting designer and the guy who'd gotten me into doing lighting in the first place. And he recommended a guy named Ben Haller, who he said, if you've got problems to be solved, or if you want to make sure that the shows happen, because you got to remember, going to Europe in '72 was pretty, was like going to Mars. You know, I mean, there was no equipment, there was no such thing as touring systems. It was.
So you guys had to
was
come up
really-
with your own
we had to-
roadworthy system.
Yeah, and there was no such thing as a touring lighting system at the time. So I came up with my end of things, and then I got in touch with Ben, who was working at I think it's the Rainbow Theatre in London at the time, which was perfect for me because then he could get together the European end of things, which was the dimmers. And then we never did get follow spots. The way we got follow spots was that we needed two, and we stole one at the first venue. Yes. And then a couple dates later, we stole another one. Or maybe we bought one of them, I don't know. But things were truly, you know, sort of Wild West in those days. Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it was.
A
It
real
was.
guerrilla
Do you remember?
action,
I
right?
mean, I really miss it in a way. You know, like
Well, I didn't go to Europe, but I remember.
the first genie lifts we used. I didn't use airlifts. I used a single pole genie lift and hung a truss from it. At this point, I was working with Ben all the time, and he'd become a part of the Grateful Dead Lights crew.
So you brought him back to the States with you?
Yeah, he came back, and then they asked us to do the lights full time, and so we created a system, and it involved these single pole lifts, which were very risky. And the first time we used them was outdoors, and there were at Roosevelt Stadium. There were 60-mile-an-hour gusts. I know I'm digressing, but there were major wind gusts, 60-mile-an-hour gusts. Of course, when you're going to do something for the first time, fly something over somebody's head on two little poles, there's going to be major wind gusts, and we had to guide them off. Once they were up there, they were secure, but everything was very hair-raising. Just getting through a gig was quite an accomplishment.
Somehow this doesn't surprise me, though. I mean, so much of what the Grateful Dead has been that out on the edge stuff. I mean, you know, going into uncharted realms seems to be part of the deal with the Dead.
It does. Also, though, in those days, it was part of the rock and roll deal. Remember, you know, Woodstock and the back behind the stage scenes of Woodstock were also as bizarre as all the footage you see of what was going on out front, or if you were there when it was all very hairy. And it's amazing that actually that there weren't more injuries. But the people, we were a pretty intelligent bunch, I think, and we were being careful, but we were pushing ourselves to the absolute physical and mental limits all the time just to get shows on. That's the way it used to work. But the Dead,
I think that must be a part of of your character that makes this agreeable to you. I mean, was the desire to be under that kind of pressure, or the willingness to be under that kind of pressure in order to do something. I mean, that's always.
Yes and no.
I remember watching you work in Winterland in '74. You know, I mean, it wasn't. I remember there was one time when you put up some mirrors someplace on the stage and started bouncing beams of light around. I thought,
and Jarid went over with the neck of his guitar and started stirring it up, like because it looked like a great cauldron of smoke was coming out of the. Yeah, Yeah.
See, that kind of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it may not all have been readily apparent to us out in the audience, but every once in a while, some breakthrough like that would happen. You think, wow, that's neat.
I thought that was neat too, and I don't know why I didn't pursue that. That was nice. Another thing that I tried in somewhere in the mid-70s at a Cow Palace show was a remote control moving light. It was called a Cyclops, and the mistake I made, or one of the many mistakes I made with that thing, was I used one. I don't know what I was thinking of, except that it was programmed with the joystick. It wasn't programmed, there was no concept of programming. Then you operate it with the joystick, and of course you couldn't do banks of, what you can do now wasn't even thought of. But people were thinking about a remote control light.
Where was
And
it?
what?
Where was it?
Where was the light?
Yeah.
Good question. It may have been, I don't remember. I have a terrible memory. It may have been down low somewhere in the scaffolding, bouncing off of one of those mirror light panels, one of those same mirror light panels.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't really remember. I think I tried it in a few
But
places.
it was something that you could control from your
with a
station.
joystick, and a joystick is really, in fact, a very awkward way to control something. It doesn't.
Trying to control 3 axes with 2 axes, you mean?
Yeah, well, it's just awkward following someone. When I first was using Panispots, I devised a joystick control for them, or had somebody do it, so that I could follow people, because I'd gotten kind of fed up with spot operators. And I thought, okay, nobody's moving. They really aren't moving. I can bypass the whole spot op problem.
You mean it was easier to do this kind of thing with the Grateful Dead than it would have been with, say, Sammy Hagar or somebody like
Yeah.
that that's covering ground?
Well, yeah, Sammy Hagar, you want follow spots. That's a beautiful look. Those Super Trooper beams barreling down the 400 feet down an arena. That's great. But for the Dead, it's a little showy, and Bruce Springsteen looks great in it. I don't think the Dead really look great in follow spots, which is why I like the Q spots, which are mounted up in the truss, which are operated by men. Anyway, it turns out that the deal is you can't follow people very well with a joystick. I mean, everyone out there may think that they could, if they had their own joystick, could do this, but you can't. It's really difficult, especially if you're trying to run a show. It's difficult. Also, the very first day that I did not use follow spots was the day that Bob was in shows at the Civic Center, some Christmas time shows at the Civic Center, I don't remember which year. Bob decided to do his running all around the stage routine, went downstage of anywhere that I had any lights focused at all. I got letters from Deadheads about this. I don't know what you think you're doing. People said, really? But, we want to see Bob, and of course when he ran downstage, I just had to laugh. And then I just grabbed the trackball or whatever I had at the time. I think at that point you had to, anyway, and got some lights down there. The very first day, do you remember they didn't do that?
I remember him climbing up the scaffolding and stuff.
And then that was terrible. I was scared, but that was dangerous. That was very dangerous. And then by that time I had lights on him again. But still, it was programmed. I had programmed things to be anywhere he could get. It took me about a year to give up on that. It was so funny. It took me a while to give up and realize that I needed follow spots, and also that I liked them. And that's a whole another thing.
Wait, to give up on them completely, or to decide you could live with them after all?
Well, the deal with the Q spots is that they're like the Pana spots. There's no orderly way to have this conversation that I know of. There's 2 kinds of lights.
That's their job.
Right. There's 2 kinds of lights, basically, that you see in the lighting system that I'm using with the Grateful Dead today. And that's what's called a PC beam. Now, I think this year's name for it is a PC beam and a PC spot. And the spot is the hard focus light that, if you know anything about lighting, it looks like a Leco. It's a hard edge light. And
for our civilians out there in the audience, that is like
they're the ones that do the most complex moves, and that have the sort of sparkly effect in them, which is created with gobos moving against each other.
And a gobo is?
And a gobo is. Let's get into this. Let's get into this.
We
a
do.
little
We
bit
do
later.
want to know.
We're really digressing. Well, yeah, but let's go. Let's back.
You want to come back to that later?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
At
were
what
saying
point?
that the Dead are into trying, sort of stretching out and trying things. That's how we got into the different kinds of lights. And
that's the thing I always admired about them, was their willingness to go off into uncharted territory. And I've always felt that you and Healy probably had most interesting jobs of anybody in your line of work. I mean, as opposed to having, like Genesis might have been a fun tour to go do with their multi-million-dollar computerized lighting rig, but it was the same moment to moment.
I couldn't agree with you
every
more.
job.
Yes,
and
yes,
you get
yes.
to improvise.
Yes.
Your job is
yeah,
way
well,
more interesting.
we get to improvise, but then yes, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And I really feel like a born again and all this kind of. I'm so happy right now because I've got to the point where I feel like I have enough prepared in advance when a show starts that I'm pleased with the prospect of improvising for a show. Now, I've never been too particularly chicken shit about it, but I have been kind of bummed in the past because there's so many things that I wanted to do and they weren't there. And people say, oh, well, it looks really nice, or maybe they think it doesn't look really nice or whatever, but I know that what's supposed to be there, which is some of, the good ideas or the things that I think would be wonderful to see, they weren't there, and so that for me that was a problem up until recently.
Are you talking about like specific?
It depends on what year you're talking about.
Or,
each year there would be things that I wished that would be there. It seemed to me that, in a way, I don't even want to. There's so much to talk about that I don't even want to go into the past, way back into the past. But let's just talk about what's happening now. In the last few years, I haven't been. This is kind of a problem because up until recently I was working with a guy named Dave Chance who was doing a lot of the moving lights effects. And I really liked what he was doing a lot. I think he was really good. And there's something, and I'm doing it all myself now basically, except for the operation of the cue spots. I sort of reshuffled the way the system is run and the way it's programmed, this whole approach to lighting the Grateful Dead, so that I can do more. And I'm enjoying that. I'm now getting together a lot of looks and lighting events that I like. They're starting to be things that I really have always wanted to see. Just barely. There's just. I do now look forward to the shows, whereas before I was always thinking, oh, I wish I'd gotten this done, and I wish I'd gotten this done, I wish we had a chance to, Dave hasn't had a chance to touch this up, and we're just roaring in here, and we're in a new venue, and they've got a scoreboard, and we've still got a lot of things programmed up in the center that are going to hit the scoreboard, or we're in a stadium, and we have a lot of things that are programmed to go straight off left and right, which means they'll just hit the scaffolding, because in a stadium you're in that little box. And I hadn't gotten it together for a lot of reasons, money and scheduling in advance and cooperation with scaffolding people and understanding that things like this are fine with Healy and it's okay for, anyway, I hadn't gotten it together to move the lights out onto the PA scaffolding, which is a solution to being enclosed in the sort of box-like stadium situation. All these, I've been solving a lot of problems lately. And it means that when a show starts, I can do some of the things that I want to do instead of thinking, gee, I'm hemmed in for various reasons. I haven't got these things programmed. I haven't got this set up right. Or, and it wasn't just a question of not working hard enough. It's just that, well, it's interesting. You have to really fight for what you want. And you have to kind of be a bit of a bad guy sometimes. And
in what sense?
You have to go to meetings.
Oh.
Band meetings. Yeah, I wish you all could see a band meeting. You go to a band meeting and they sit there, everyone in the band just sits there and they just, for the fun of it, like to chew you up.
They do that to you too?
Oh yeah, and I don't care.
This is not going to be used, you guys.
No, it's fine. It's good. I think it's a great thing. I wish people could see it. They just sit there and Jerry's got a fake cigar, and they say, how much money do you want this time? Or I'll walk in and they'll just say, whatever it is, we don't need it. And Brent says, he looks at a picture I've got of a set that I want to do, and he says, my daughter could do much better than this, and I want to do it next year. Can I get paid as much? They just tear you to shreds. But I don't mind, and I get nervous and everything. I've noticed, by the way, that a lot of people get nervous at band meetings. And they're just on the mat or whatever it is. They're really good at ripping you up, you know. So I always have to have a little bottle of Calistoga water or something, and you know, I get like, but I love it still. I really like to go in there. It's fun, you know. They mean well. They really mean well. And every time I go into a band meeting and ask for something, unfortunately, it's not like I'm going in and saying, hey, you guys, I got this great idea and you're going to make a whole lot of money out of it or something. I'm always asking to spend money. And they never need to spend the money because the shows are usually already sold out anyway. So I'm going to, anybody else in my position is usually like, well, this is going to make the show sell. Well, people could, my feeling and what they, up until a few years ago, is that people could care less and that it's very hard not to digress here. Anyway, the difference, what's happened to me in the last year or 2 years is that I've realized that, at least I hope, that people do want to see, they like a visual sort of feast and celebration going on, and that I believed very strongly that the stadium gigs, the way they used to look, with a little black stage down there from 400 feet away, was just too grim. And so I believe in what I'm trying to do, and I've been fighting for it. And as a result of that, in other words, I go to battle. I go into the band meeting and just do battle, and I do enjoy it. And I've gotten kind of a reputation as starting to be like a pushy person, which is, I'm sort of, I'm pretty mild-mannered, But as a result, things are happening the way I'm starting to see what I want to see. So,
can you give me a couple of examples of the sort of thing you're talking about? You were saying that now you have more of these problems solved before you go to work, and can you give me an example of the sort of thing you're referring to in the way that we can relate to it as audience members seeing it? Like what? Well,
there's so many things. Here's one. In order to focus the lights, you need to, in order for the focuses to look good, for various technical reasons, they get out of whack from gig to gig. When you get into a new venue, you want to have all the lights out so that you can focus the room looks. The stage you can do by having a stand-in on stage, and I won't get into that. Well, you can imagine how well it goes over with the band's crew when I say, okay, let's turn on all the lights because Candace wants to focus the lights. Stop what you're doing. Don't worry about that problem you're having with Jerry's guitar, Steve. Time for Candace to focus. Well, forget that, That doesn't work. So, and even when people are really done, they consider it a sort of an imposition, like, who the hell do you think you are, having us turn on all the lights while we're working, even though they're done. But now I'm also discovering that they're not really done, that there's all sorts of people do have a lot of work to do there. And I sometimes can get too pushy trying to say, well, I need to get my work done too. You never really know what the realities are. So I went out and got a bunch of work lights, outdoor 300-watt ports, double-ended cord, you've seen them, they're everywhere, and hung them on the truss, and also lit the stage in white so I can light their work area and light the stage, and then turn out all the house lights and do some focusing of my lights in the afternoon of a load-in. This is not such a problem on the next few days, but the load-in in the afternoon, it is a problem. And then I looked at my stuff, and I can see that, in fact, it does look good. And that where they needed to be, focuses needed to be compiled, that, I've been able to check them and see that that I compiled them right. And that you see, you can't, in my situation, you can't see what you're doing unless it's dark.
When you say compiled, what do you mean?
When you focus things, lots of times you'll use, say, half the lights will be in one focus. Say they'll be in a stage focus, and then the other half could either be in that stage focus, say a basic full stage focus where all the lights from all the directions are focused on the band. Then you could have another focus that compiles an audience focus, where you have all the lights focused in the audience. You take half of that focus and half of the stage focus and record them as one thing. So that you have all the backlights are on the band on stage, and then the side lights, in this case I'm just referring to Panospots, to the hard edge lights. The side lights would be shooting up, say, through the PA, and the front lights are shooting up at the ceiling. So you have to compile, you have focuses where, or here's a simpler example of compiling a focus. One of the focuses I do every day is an all bob focus, which for years has been a 761. It's called 761. Don't ask me don't ask me why, it's too long, it's a boring story. Then I might want Bob and Brent, so I have an all Brent focus, which is 763. Now you might see all the lights go to Brent at some point. That's a 763. That's the location memory for that focus.
Oh, okay.
Well, I would like to just describe that, how these memories, what a look is composed of, but we'll do that later on. So I would just take I'd take half the lights that are on Bob and hold them on Bob, and then go into a 763, just hit the 763, and then move the rest of the lights over there, and then I record that as 761.3, which means 1 and 3, Bob and Brent. To me, it's just a sort of mnemonic device. You know how you have these numbers that you use in programming, helping you to remember things. So I do that a lot with room focuses. There's a lot of compiling of different things. And there's just a lot of focusing. And then there's hopefully a new idea that I might be able to program in there in the afternoon. All that takes darkness. Darkness is just the most difficult thing in the world to get. I mean, imagine how outdoors in the summer, getting ready on a summer afternoon. There's nothing I can do at all. So that's another thing that to get back to this business of being able to focus indoors, that just involves getting work lights, which is simple. That's a simple thing. Get work lights, light the band's work, the stage, the people who are working on stage, light their working area, and then turn out the house lights, or turn them way down, and then I can see what I'm doing in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Then I know when the show starts that my focuses are going to look good. And it's interesting that the asymmetrical stuff requires a lot more darkness than the symmetrical stuff. You can kind of sort of see at least that things are symmetrical, which I think that there's way too much symmetry in what I'm doing. But when you do something asymmetrical, you got to have the lights out to see if it looks good. It's just, so that's a kind of premium time. Some things are harder to do than others just for time.
So the reason that is easier to do now is because the equipment is better and because you've gotten better at your job?
No, it's easier to do now because I keep on solving problems like, that's a simple one, this business of the work lights. But another thing was, we get boxed in on the stage in a stadium show. So the stadium shows, the lights are all really dull because for one thing, all the programming most of the programming that sends them out and around sideways, we can't even use those things. Or when we do use them, they look really screwy. And we haven't had time to reprogram them because you're out, there's no time.
You can't save a set of presets like from one stadium tour to the next?
Oh yeah, you do, but when do you do the focusing for them? You only have a few hours the night before to do the focusing. You've got all this stuff. My discs are full, absolutely jam-packed. And it takes much more than a day to focus them. And we don't go into stadiums and set up early with the stadium, that's really out of the question, because then everything you do takes a tremendous amount of money. And there is not a lot of waste. Some people might just think this is a scream, but as far as I know, there's not a lot of waste in at least the lighting and sound department of the Grateful Dead. We get to spend a lot of money, Dan and I do, but we're very careful with what we do. And I think we're pretty efficient with it. This stuff is just expensive. If you want to focus some lights in a stadium situation, you have to do it the night before. You can't go in 2 days early. You can't rent the stadium, have the union crew, have all that gear. When you rent lights, you rent it by the day. It's not by the show.
Plus the cost of the crews, having everybody there early is prohibitive, of course. So
I do these 2 years in a row now. I do rehearsals, lighting rehearsals. Rehearsals is a sort of screwball word for it, but I get, each fall I seem to I design a new lighting system, and just something new comes to me. I guess I'm usually pretty fed up after the summer. We always go through hellish situations in the summer. And I come up with a new lighting system, and then that needs to be, you do need to set that up and program requires all new programming because none of the old programming will work. So I've been going to HJK and working there for a week with a lighting system and nobody else, just me and the lights and the lights
What do
crew.
you put on the stage to?
First year I put mannequins on the stage. I always meant to dress them. I never got them dressed out. Susanna Millman came over and took the wonderful pictures of my. I just had to get it photographed of the mannequins on stage, a bunch of naked,
great.
and we. That was good. So we had the Grateful Dead, the 6 Grateful Dead band members, and some stuff that sort of looked like Dead gear, and smoked up the room a little bit to give it a show feeling. And then I programmed, and that worked real well. I couldn't do without that now. It's funny, things get harder as they get more sophisticated, of course. I mean, it used to be you just design a lighting plot and go out and that would be it. Now you need to program.
Do you ever go out and look at it from elsewhere, like go up into the high balconies and take a look and see?
Yeah, I do. At the end of a series of shows on the road, I fly with the band to the next city, and we get out right away and get on a little plane and go off to the next city. So Dan and I leave early. We leave during the encore so we can be backstage. And that's my chance to look at things. It doesn't really take that much time to get back there. It also usually gives an opportunity. It's an opportunity for someone on the lights crew to run the lighting system, which I think is a great thing. I really like to say, okay, here, there's this, because it's such a wonderful thing to be able to use. I'm so lucky to have this thing, this system. And I do like to give somebody else the opportunity to use it. So in this case now it's Jeff Metter, when he has time, which isn't very much time, but can come out and program some things that he might want to do. So he has a shot at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I, on the way out, kind of go up into the seats and get a look at it, which is nice. In a way, I like it better from everywhere else than from, I like the way it looks from anywhere else but center.
Why don't you move your station someplace else then?
I don't know. It's never worked well for me to do that.
No, didn't you used to work in a box sort of off to the side on the floor of Winterland? That's the first time I remember being conscious of you was when there was a funny little box sort of
off to
two-thirds
the
of the
side.
way back
yeah.
on the side, almost under the
Right.
balcony kind
Yeah.
of, right?
Yeah, that's
was-
okay.
Yeah, well, it's not like having to do it from like way, way off in the corner or anything.
No, that would be okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll do it, but
I guess it does make sense in a lot of ways to be right there in the middle, behind the sound.
Well,
booth.
you start off with, it would probably be good, actually, because there is too much symmetry, but there's all these focuses that it's kind of a bad habit I've gotten into, maybe, that the symmetry bit. But if you're going to go for symmetry, then you got to be in the center to focus it.
I wonder if you're aware of how much more the audience seems to be aware of your work. I mean, I hear more people talking in almost 100% positive ways about it. I mean, since the panospots and stuff have come into play, you have been able to be a more tangible presence in the action. Are you aware of that? I mean, do you get more feedback from people? More people talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, I hear a lot
now.
more. I've just thought of 12 ways to digress from what you just said. Yeah, while you're at it, you say most people. I really would be interested in, I often wonder what people don't like.
Well,
And one of the reasons it took me a while to get started with this, I started out with the panospots really pussyfooted around, I mean, I would go from off stage to what was then called a corners focus, 777. From off stage, and the lights would go on stage. So they would go from a direct focus to a cross focus. Wow, big deal. And but part of it is just the concept of pushing a button and having a cue work with the Grateful Dead, with somebody else where you've programmed it, and you've done like a lighting rehearsal and you've got your cues and those are the cues and bang, that's completely different. Then you could go all out and there's no problem. But here, this concept of pushing that button, and if it's a gold button, the meaning that you're going to change everything, the meaning that you're going to change, a lot's going to happen. And then with the Dead, it's like, oh my God, they didn't really play it that way. You know, they just kind of, nothing really happened there this time.
So you mean you turned a big corner with the lights and they didn't turn it the same way that you
No,
thought they were going
it's
to?
just that you have to learn when it's okay to go for it and when you better cool out and not take the chance. And also not be afraid of just making one humongous, ridiculous mistake, because if you just have to be willing to do that with the dead, because yeah, I know, but then see, it's not that I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I mean, of course, everybody's afraid to make mistakes, but that's not terribly afraid. You know, it's not a big deal. But I wondered. I thought that there was people can be very, and deadheads are very. Hey, this is the way things are supposed to be with the Grateful Dead, and we didn't come here to see lights.
Sometimes you can reason with those people, sometimes you can't, you know. But,
yeah.
And you sort of, there's also one of those things where, like, if you're going to believe your good press, you have to believe your bad press too, right? So if you're going to take compliments from people, you better be willing to take criticism as well, right?
Right. Well,
But you must have a voice in here that is the final answer, right?
No, you know, I think that's kind of would be sort of pretentious to say. I imagine everyone else who worked with Dan Healy would say, God bless Dan Healy, you know, he would say, yes, I know, you know, he knows, he always knows. I don't always know. And and the rest of the band does. Aren't they amazing? You know, they just always have the answers, except for Bob, maybe. But they're so sure about everything, and they're so, what's the word? A little glib in a way. But anyway, I don't know. But that's not going to stop me. At a certain point, you make a decision, I think. But I am curious to know what the audience doesn't like, and I would digest that information. And if they didn't like some, of course, in some cases, sometimes you're really vulnerable. You know, it's like, oh, I thought that was really good. Oh shit, it wasn't good. But mostly, I just want to know. And if a lot of people don't like something, even I might either decide, well, I think this is really good, and I've got to do what I believe. Because in some ways, you know, maybe you can be edifying to people. Maybe you can. Maybe they're not seeing something that you are.
Well, that's what I meant by saying that sometimes you
But then,
can
on the other
make
hand,
progress with it. You know?
This is it's their show as much as anybody's, as much as it is the band's or mine certainly. And so, if a lot of people in the audience don't like something, then maybe that's fine. Maybe I can decide, well, I really think this is a good thing, but I'm not going to do it because people don't like it. You know, why do it? There's too many other things to do. So, you know, you could go, it just depends on what it is. But I would like to know, you know, I'd be curious to hear the things that are really annoying to people. Like, are people just, would they like to, thank you very much, not have so much light in their eyes so we can watch the band
Well, that's one of the questions that leads to one of the questions I wanted to ask you about that. You are lighting the audience more now, and that's one of the things that the moving spots gives you. I think that you're able to very often you'll bring the lights from the stage out into the audience and up over our heads and stuff, or get the spots swirling around and stuff. And I usually find it pretty enjoyable. But is that something that you're doing more consciously? That's a recent development. Are you ever thinking of lighting the audience for the band?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing one of the dreams I always had was to light the audience. And well, there's this cue that I always wanted to do before there was any moving lights. On playing in the band, after the opening section of the tune, the vocal section of the tune, then there's like 4 measures, and then the lights generally leave the stage. Well, I always wanted to do that before I knew anything about moving lights, and I did it once at the Garden. And I hung a lot of lights in the room. I rented a separate sort of lighting setup from a local lighting company from C Factor in New York, and lit the room in separated by channels so that I could have the lights go through the room in a wave of light and go out all together and have a moment of blackness, which I've kind of chickened away from lately, and I'd sort of like to get back to the old days of total blackness, but maybe that's really dumb. Anyway, they all left the room, and then they slowly came back. This took I had to hang the lights and circuit. It was like a big deal. It also, with the same lights, I was able to light up the room, and it was nice. It was a good thing. It worked out really well. And I've always wanted to light the audience and not the band, and I've never liked. It's funny because what I do for a living in some ways has seemed to me against my basic principles regarding shows and music and musicians and celebrities. I don't like the idea of isolating the band from the audience. I don't like the separation that lighting creates. When you're on stage and standing in lights, you can't see the audience. That's, I think, in the case of the Grateful Dead, that's a very bad thing. It might be good for, I don't know who it would be good for. It doesn't seem to me any real musician or performer would want to be isolated from their audience. So I've always wanted to be able to light the whole room, and it seems to me the event, that if you're lighting a musical event, it should be, this involves the audience, and it's not just something that's going on stage. I guess you could say, well, it is something that's going on stage, but really the event is it's the whole room. We're all in there together. And I think that the last thing the Grateful Dead ever wanted was to be set up on a pedestal. And so I always felt kind of bad about that. Why it didn't occur to me to light the room, I don't know. I think that was kind of dumb. Of course, it would have been very expensive because you can't, before the days of moving lights, that's a big area and a light, and there it is. And there's never enough lights for the stage, so.
It also would have been fairly static that way, wouldn't it?
Totally, and
Yeah.
the audience does not like stationary lights focused on them. Boy, they know when that light doesn't move, and they don't like that at all. They don't, they come over and say, oh, I've got a light focused on me. Is this going to be here for the whole show?
I've seen that used in ways that I thought was really awful by various rock and roll tours, or even where under a riser there would be a whole bunch of really big, bright, white, yellow, white lights
Audience
shining
abuse.
out into the
They
audience.
call it audience abuse, with a chuckle. Every time they refer to it, people who work for lighting companies say, oh yeah, so we put the audience abuse wherever it was. And
How very interesting.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of creepy.
yeah, it is kind of creepy. It is.
But one of the things that you do that I find really enjoyable is sometimes you'll spin the lights out into the crowd and then sort of gather it all back up again and bring us all back in, kind of.
Uh-huh.
And
Oh, that's
I-
nice that it feels that
yeah.
way.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
do they ever come out at you, and do you ever feel assaulted or distracted by them? You
Depends
must.
on how high I am.
Yeah, I got more compliments on the New Year's show. At New Year's, I said to myself, this is an opportunity to try everything I've been wanting to try, but that I'm not really sure, this might be really bad, so I might, not try it some other night. New Year's, no problem. Everyone is already so happy for one reason or another. They're so lit that anything I do they're never going to really see it. So at New Year, I had a really good time New Year's. I just tried everything. Every little weird ass thing I'd never tried before, I tried. And some things I was really happy with, and some things I wasn't, and then I'd just leave them out there and try to work on them, things that I'd never been able to get to work right, until I could make them work right, because that's the best situation to try. And I think actually as a result of that, that show it looked really good, although there was some really terrible stuff in it.
Let me ask
But-
you about another. Oh, go ahead.
Just overall, turned out to be a good way to do things. That show and the last show in Miami, that ended the fall tour, were a lot of fun for me. They were just a no holds barred, go nuts with lights and have a lot of fun, and I did have a lot of fun.
Run a few experiments and
Yeah.
go for it. Good.
Yeah.
I remember sometimes during the Greek run this last summer, I was working on the KPFA broadcast, and I generally I'm either get to be all the way in the audience or I'm all the way not able to listen to music.
right.
I finally got out there for the second set of the last show and sat down and got all the way in all of a sudden. I mean, I had a great second set experience. And it was a tremendously good set, and it was one of those times when I thought the lighting was just amazing.
Uh-huh.
There, especially on the other one. I mean, the band was just roaring all the way, and it seemed like you know, it was one of those times I was conscious of everything happening maximally well for everybody. Do you remember that? Was it good for you too?
Yeah, it was. It was. Those were wonderful shows. They were really good musically. The Greeks usually are. And often when the music is really good, it's all I can do to keep up with it. And I go through those kind of guilt and angst things that we were talking about. I don't remember whether the tape was rolling at that point or not, but of not being prepared, which can really make it hard to enjoy the music and get loose and have a good time. That was a good time. And Dave was operating the one set of Panospots at that point. He was doing a beautiful, Dave Chance, doing a beautiful job. He was really on. And we had come out of this really awful summer experience also where it rained and we had a lot of technical difficulties. And everything seemed to gel for those shows. That was just beautiful. And the set looked good and it was just great. I really enjoyed that. And
you had that fabulous art decorating the stage to work with as well. Savka's banners. And those seemed to work better at the Greek than they did in the stadium.
It's funny because I had agreed not to use those at the Greek to save money, and I forgot.
You had to pay the artist for the use of them?
No.
Or?
But it cost money to set it up.
To rig it
the Cameron Sears had been saying, no, we should, this is a benefit, we should save money. And I said, oh yeah, right. And then it just completely slipped my mind. It's really, I have a lot to do with those things because it's like, I have to work out the logistics of getting it up and make sure the scaffolding's set up for it. There's not a... Anyway, I was busy. And I was just such a busy little bee, I guess, that I just roared right into that thing out of the whole summer and forgot we weren't doing the set. And I'm really glad we did it because I thought that it looked the best there, too. It actually looked better on the West Coast in the venues for which it was not designed than it did in the East Coast in the venues for which it was.
Like Shoreline also? Did you use it at Shoreline?
We used it at Shoreline in the opening. I didn't use it at the last Shoreline. But we used bits and pieces of it as they had just gotten done at the Shoreline that preceded the summer tour, and it didn't look good there. It was too gross, I thought. And the pieces that were used needed other pieces that weren't there yet. Also, the pieces that were behind the stage, which were used there, I thought were the worst of it. I didn't like
and
those
everything
pieces.
else that was behind it, that whole big billowing white thing, the roof of Shoreline. So,
oh, yeah?
Yeah. It all worked beautifully well at the Greek.
Yeah, well, something I didn't see. I saw the camera, I saw like the wide shots of it, but not in the wide shots that were wide enough to see the white roof. The contrast was so bizarre that the set was lost in there. So I actually never did trundle up there to the back to see what it looked like. It probably did look much better from the back to the naked eye.
I don't know either.
But I didn't like the way it looked at
totally
Shoreline.
spectacular it was at the Greek.
Yeah, it did work out.
But getting back to that Greek thing, I've talked with the musicians a lot about the times, and I when things are really going well, you don't have to think. When the music is playing the band, and Phil has said stuff like, consciousness is a burden, you're just there, It's like
that's wonderful.
And you'd almost have to work to, consciously ruin it. So I want to know if you get that state too, where you're on autopilot. And
I do, and I feel like, I'm glad you asked this because I feel really grateful. And at times like that, I want to just turn around to everybody in the audience and say, thanks, you guys, for letting me have this wonderful toy. It's kind of a dumb word, but this wonderful thing, so that we can see all this nice stuff happen. And it's not like you make your programs and your looks and stuff, but when it really starts to work, it is just happening, and it's because the band is playing so well, and these ideas just pop into your head, and if you're lucky, and if it's going right, you know how it is. It just seems to come right out your hands, and you don't hit a wrong number, 701.1 doesn't become just 0.1, which is some other limit memory, and God knows what, it just all flows, and you don't have to, it's true. When you have to think, you get a different kind of show, I think, when you have to think. You can do a good show when you're thinking, but the best is when it just happens, and it can, and it's amazing that can happen with something that's so computerized and so programmed and so burdened with numbers as
But
this
that's what the
lighting
music is
programming
that way. I mean, music is
But they're just playing things that they have around them all the time. I wish I had, well, I don't mean just, but I mean they're not, it's weird that you can, if also that when you have to think in terms of a lot of different numbers to be shuttled into different computer areas, that it can just happen as easily as playing something, you know.
Why does that strike you as weird? I mean, that's
Because it's new to
that's
me,
your,
maybe.
but that's your.
I mean, maybe it's my thing. I've been doing lights for 20 years.
That's
but
what
it's
I
only,
mean. That's.
But
it's
not
like,
programming numbers.
Why
Used to
should
be
it
you just bring
surprising?
up
Oh, I see
channels
what
and
you're
shit, you know,
saying,
or if you.
But musicians can be quintessentially logical and you know, in the next instant be absolutely instinctual. I mean, that's the thing about music is that it is eminently quantifiable, and yet you know the thing that makes it art, the things that makes it, you know, move you is not in the numbers. It's not in the you can use the mathematical relationships to explain it, but you can't explain why a certain note will make you cry, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when that stuff is at its highest, when Phil says, you know, you can't put your finger in the wrong place, it means that your brain is functioning, you know, optimally. You are doing your job, or it's in its highest moments for me as a musician. It's like you're a witness to the creation as much as the audience is.
Yes,
like,
it's
you're
like,
not doing it; it's doing it. It's happening.
This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And sometimes Dan Healy is really great. He just cracks me up the way his approach to things is. And sometimes he'll look around at me. I kind of miss being next to him, and he'll just look around with that big grin, you know, of his, like, ooh, you know, it's just all happening, just like you're saying, you know, and it's just wonderful. Yeah. And nobody is doing it; it's just happening.
Do you and Healy do things to entertain each other sometimes, or?
Not as much as we could, I suppose. Once, a few months ago, now that I've been working behind him because I want to be in the center also, we take up less space. And once what do you mean things to entertain each other?
Well,
I might have been misunderstanding what you were asking.
Why don't you answer what you thought,
well,
and we'll see if it was it.
This isn't it at all, I'm sure.
I don't mean you play pranks on each other.
I was working away, you know, I'm very intense about what I'm doing because it's all I can do to get it in there fast enough. It's the programming is not set up to do a Grateful Dead show. They want to do, this is supposed to be Huey Lewis or something. Bam, we know that the guitar player and the bass player are going to run down stage and da-da-da-da-da, and the horn sections, blah, 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 blah. So it's all meant to be programmed that way. And the way I have to do it, I'm like, you know, feverishly typing away. And so I get that look on my face, you know. And which Healy thinks is pretty funny. Everybody thinks I think it's pretty funny. So one day I was working away at something, just trying to get all this shit in time for a cue that, you know, an idea I had and trying to get it in. And I look up at the stage, hit the goal button or whatever it was, and I can't see a thing. There's nothing there. It's pitch black. And then all of a sudden, bang, Healy, it goes away. And Healy had been holding up a big black piece of duvetilla. He climbed up right in front of me, and held this thing, so I didn't see anything, you know. And then he took it down and he did that same, you know the way he does that grin, just that same ridiculous grin of his, and I was, yeah, that was really great. That was.
So you answered the question, do you guys pull pranks on each other? But what I actually
meant
was,
funny.
do you guys?
Oh, do.
Well, the question, it was a much more sort of creative. You know, do you get each other off with your work? Is really, I mean, the pranks and stuff are fun, but.
Yeah,
I mean, are you
do,
conscious
but,
of? So the other night I was watching. I was out on the main floor, sort of off to the side of where you guys were working, and I happened to be like even with Healy. And every once in a while I'd look over just to see what he was doing, you know. And all through Terrapin, he was just standing there, like everything was working. He was there digging it. It was so cool.
More than anyone I know, he could do that cat that ate the canary look. You know, he just really knows how to enjoy himself, which has kind of been a lesson for me. He's been a lesson for me he's been difficult to work with because he's a very pushy person, and that's why he gets so much done, and that's why it sounds so good. You really have to be, I'm finding out very late in life that you have to be kind of pushy to get things done. But he's very clear about things, and when he's having a good time, he really has a good time. You know, and sometimes I'll be bummed out about things. I look over at Healy and like, it's not, he's having terrible times with the sound, and he'll just sit there instead of freaking out about it. He'll just sit there and grin. And I've found that what he's doing is he's just not going to get pulled down by the situation. He's just going to relax, enjoy what there is to enjoy, and when he figures out what he can do to make it better, then he'll do it. Instead of, because the worst thing you could do is try too hard.
Right. That's one of the things that I think the Grateful Dead teaches us is, you know, improvisation within a structure.
Right.
That what, you know, given the situation, what are you going to do?
Grateful Dead teaches us, but they do. And Jerry, he just like, you know, I'm always saying, this is really fucked up, and he's like, forget about it. Who cares? You know, that's done. Don't worry about it. He's a real. They're all real lessons in that regard. They don't labor a disastrous show. When it's done, it's done. They, you know, maybe a few winces, but that's it. Goodbye, history. Better luck next time. Which is really good. That's something that I'm sort of just learning.